My name is Wendy Epperson. I am the Customer Account Manager. I'm going to be your hostess for today's webinar. We also have Allie Reagan on the call. She's going to help me moderate and answer questions as we go. This will be recorded so you can get to it later. And we probably are only going to take about 30 minutes. So if you do have questions at the end, please feel free to stay and ask your questions. With that, I always like to start with the mission statement at Njevity, which is to improve the life and success of our customers and partners by providing exceptional business application experiences that simplify, inform, and delight. Obviously, these webinars fall into the inform zone, and if I'm lucky, they might delight you. But if you have any other needs along these lines, anything we can do to provide you exceptional business application experiences, you can always email me, wepperson@njevity.com, and I can help figure out how we can accomplish those goals for you. Our webinar today is 1099s from start to finish, from soup to nuts. We're going to look at setup, maintenance, editing, everything. That said, like I said earlier, it probably will only take us about half an hour to cover all of this. So go ahead and queue up your questions. All right, we wanted to start with the 1099 setup window, and the reason that I added this one to the slide deck this year is because some of the thresholds have changed or will be changing in 2026. So under the payables management setup, the options button or the 1099 setup button at the bottom, you can go in and for each tax type, you can set those thresholds. For example, a 1099 NEC is set to a $600 threshold. If you want to send 1099 NECs to everyone, regardless of the dollar amount that they've accumulated with you, you could set all of these to 0 if you want to. So this is up to you to maintain, but it does get set to the government threshold, the government requirements, although I think the change they're doing this year, they're not rolling out as an automatic update, so you'll want to make sure you visit this window if those thresholds need to be changed for you. All right, from there, I wanted to touch on smart lists. So out of the box, there is a smart list under purchasing vendors, 1099 vendors, and it is based on, you'll see at the bottom, the first 1,000 records where the 1099 type is not equal to not a 1099 vendor. So double negative there. But this is just a quick list of the vendors who are set to get some kind of 1099 for you. You could modify this list and add the tax ID in there to make sure that they have a tax ID. That would be easy enough just by changing the search, actually changing the columns and adding that tax ID column into the columns. From here, you can double click on any of these vendors to go in and see what kind they are. But this is just a good starting point. If you look at this list and you know that somebody is on here that shouldn't be, or vice versa, somebody isn't on here that should be, then you're going to want to start doing the 1099 setup maintenance, which is what our next slide is. Under cards, vendors, options. So you're going to pull that vendor up in vendor maintenance. You're going to go to the options button, and over here down this left-hand side is where we're setting the tax type, the box, and that tax registration or tax ID number. So you're going to want to make sure all of those are populated for all of the vendors that need to get 1099s. And again, if somebody is in that list that shouldn't be, then you want to come in here and change them to be a non-1099 vendor. Okay. From there, now that we've got 1099 vendors, we can actually go into the inquiry for those vendors and see the details. So this is going to show me by vendor what the dollar amount they've accumulated is. This is just an inquiry, so it's a view only. You'll notice all this at the bottom is grayed out. You can't change any of this. You can toggle between month. If I wanted to see a specific month or if I wanted to see a different year, I could. If I look at the year and it shows dollar amounts here and I want to figure out what month it's in, I can do that and start toggling through the months. You can also see what their settings are for as far as a direct sale or a FATCA or a state if you add that. But again, view only, can't edit the information. This is a good window if you want somebody to start looking at the dollar amounts for 1099 vendors, but you don't want them to have the ability to change them. From there, we go to cards. And cards, you can change the dollar amounts in. So same thing, you can toggle between month and year. If I figure out that there's a year, I would be looking here at 2025. If they had dollar amounts in here, then I could change those. I might want to change them by month. If I know there was a specific month these guys got their 1099 amounts accrued in, then I might want to put it in for a specific month. I could put it in for just the year total if I wanted to. Populating this window will generate a 1099. However, it does not update the actual transactions. So the transaction that was entered that did not get properly flagged as a 1099 is still in the system, not properly flagged as a 1099. And the caveat here is if I ever run a reconcile on the vendors, the reconcile is going to go look at the transaction tables. It's going to look to see which transactions are 1099 transactions. If they're not flagged as 1099 transactions, it's going to add that up. It's going to find out that there is no 1099 amounts, and it's going to zero these buckets back out. So there are some pros and cons here. I have in the past set up a little company just to print 1099s. I needed to be able to do 1099s for a company that I wasn't tracking anywhere in GP, and I just needed to get some 1099s out the door. So I set up a company in GP, added the handful of vendors I needed to, came into this window, plugged in the dollar amounts, and printed the 1099s. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, just simple little fix. And you can also use this just to update, oops, well, that was interesting, just to update dollar amounts if needed for a short term. But again, keep in mind that it does not update the actual transactions. Any questions so far? Okay, so next is the actual transactions, and this is where I can edit the actual transactions. So in this case, I'm going in, I'm able to see transactions that were entered for this vendor. I'm able to see the 1099 amount, and I can update that 1099 amount if I want to. So for example, let's say I had somebody come out and paint the office, and they sent me an invoice for $10,000, but I know that $5,000 of that is materials. That $5,000 in materials should not be 1099able. But when we entered the invoice, we entered the whole amount, the whole $10,000 as a 1099able amount. I can come in here and change that transaction so that that one specific transaction, even though the invoice was for $10,000, the 1099 amount of that is for only $5,000. And if you don't know, you can change that on the fly when you're entering transactions. I didn't make a slide for that. If you guys need to see that at the end, let me know and we'll go take a look. But this one does update the actual transactions. It's writing back to those tables. It's updating those 1099 amount fields. And if you do a reconcile, it doesn't go away. So it's a really safe way to do changes if you need to only make a few. If you've got to make a bunch of changes, this is really not the best way to do that. All right. So with the year-end update last year, they added some additional viewing functionality, and I wanted to put it in here. So from the 1099 inquiry window or from the 1099 transaction window, if you drill back into a transaction, it will take you in and you have the option. So actually on the previous window, you have the option in here to sort this by calendar year. So your 1099s are calculated on a calendar year basis. And this window will let you sort it by calendar year. If I zoom into a transaction from the inquiry, it will open this window and automatically sort it by calendar year and apply that filter for me. In addition, in that window we were just looking at, that edit 1099 transaction, they've added the ability to print an edit list. So you can actually get the dollar amounts here. So an edit list by, so you can see the details by vendor of what you're going to pay them for. There is an edit list we'll look at in the 1099 window, but it doesn't show you the details. All right. If you have vendors who did not get marked as 1099 vendors, then you can mass update those. So under utilities, update 1099 information, you have the ability to say from tax type and box number to tax type and box number. And you can do that at the vendor level for anything that's a 1099 transaction or for both. So if I have a vendor that didn't get flagged as 1099 vendor, or a group of vendors that didn't get flagged as 1099 vendors, I can go in and set all of those vendors to a certain tax type and a certain box. So let's say I have a bunch of employees and they're all in vendor class. So your range is down here when you have selected vendor, the ranges are all vendor related, vendor ID, vendor name, vendor class, things like that. So I can go down here and say for an entire class of vendors, I need to move them from not a 1099 to being a 1099 NEC box 6 or 7, whatever box that is, okay? That will update the vendor records. So that's just going into the vendor and saying, flag this vendor as a 1099. If I then need to update the transactions, then I would need to come in and say, okay, these now for these vendors that are 1099 vendors, let's make them all 1099 transactions. So, and then I've got some transaction ranges in there. So if I wanted to only put specific transactions as 1099 transactions, I could, but then I'm just updating those transactions. Again, this does update the actual transactions and is not removed if you run reconcile. Okay, so this is how to go in and mass and get those 1099 transactions recorded as 1099 transactions. There is also, under the Professional Service Tools library, a 1099 modifier. It does basically the same thing as utilities. The only difference is this one modifies the records for the chosen year only. So the utilities one we were just looking at will go back and say that that vendor was a 1099 vendor for all of their life, and all of their transactions were always 1099 transactions, and will update the full history of that vendor. This one is going to do only the chosen year and only records that have been paid. I think that should say have been paid. It won't go back and change the haven't been paid transactions. So most people don't have access to this anyway. I wanted to throw it out there so you know it's there. If you do need to use this for something, contact our support group and they can help you, but usually you're going to be using this one to update. Okay, all right. With that, under routines, print 1099 is where we actually get to our printing functionality. So you're going to pick the appropriate type, right? Each type's going to have a different, slightly different form: miscellaneous, dividends, interest, NECs. Under the form type, you have a choice of single feed, continuous, or with lines. So GP will actually print on a blank piece of paper all the lines required to create 1099s. I can't remember, I believe it's a 4-up format, so I believe it's 4 on the page. And I know that you can, or used to could buy at the office store, you could buy blank 4-up paper that had perforations on it. So that's actually a really easy way to do that. Generally, if you do that, then you don't have to mess around with any kind of alignments. Don't forget, we've added this box down here for partially masking the tax ID if you want to do that. You also have the option down here to print just an alignment form and your 1096 form as well. You cannot electronically file from GP. You can only print forms, but we'll look on the next screen at a couple of different options for that. And the last one down here, really importantly, make sure you don't have access to a modified form version. So if you modified a 1099 form 5 years ago to sync up the alignment properly, and you still have access to that modified 1099 form, you are not getting access to any of the new form updates that Microsoft publishes each year with their year end. And we'll take a look at that here in a second. We'll see if we can, I'll kind of show you briefly how to look at that. You may not be able to look at each user's security, but we'll look and see if there is a modified version, and then how to tell if somebody has it or not. Okay, with that, here are some software solutions for filing electronically. Some of these, like W2Mate, the second one down here, you go into that 1099 printing window and you print an edit list, and you print the edit list of file, and then you upload it into W2Mate. There's a couple of fields in W2Mate where you put in your tax ID, your state, things like that, and then it creates the file. And this is, the last time I looked at W2Mate, it was about $299, $300, something like that. It's just a flat fee. You install, it's easy to install, it's easy to set up. I was talking to our consultants yesterday, and some of them said they prefer Atrix, which is on this list down here. There's a couple other ones, but you can see these are priced by form. So if you only have to submit 3 or 4, you might want to do a priced by form one instead of a flat fee one. And then there's always Green Shades. Green Shades is a known entity for doing filing like this in GP. All right, I've put some links to some resources out here. If you need these links, let me know. But Terry Healy is the Microsoft person who puts out all the year-end updates, and she's got a blog for the year-end and how to do all kinds of tips and tricks. She's got, and then the link to the actual update if you're installing it locally on your on-prem. Again, if you need help with that, just email support. And then I wanted to throw in, we have new training with Njevity that is available on demand. And the way that it's set up is you can go in and purchase the entire AP training suite for $99. And it is broken into modules by pretty much every function you can do in Accounts Payable. And it's all built in 2 to 15-minute consumable nuggets. So there are pieces in the training that talk about the 1099s in a little bit more detail, not a little bit more detail, but in broken down nuggets, along with, you know, vendor maintenance and doing transaction entries and et cetera. So I just wanted to point out that we have this new training that has small consumable nuggets and includes 1099s as well. And with that, let's open it up to questions. And if we don't have any, then we'll see if we can toggle over to software and take a look at a couple of things. I don't see any questions coming in. Let me see if I can unmute you guys. Okay, everyone is unmuted, so you can also ask your questions directly. And let's see if I can toggle over to my environment. Okay, so as far as the modified reports, if you go to GP, Tools, Customize, Customization, Maintenance, this will show you if you have any modified reports. You can see I do have a 1099 laser modification and a 1099 non-employee compensation. So if my AP folks who would normally cut 1099s have access to these two reports, then they are not getting, and we've installed the year-end update, so we've gotten the latest updates from Microsoft, then my new guys are not getting access to those new reports because they're getting access to these old reports. So what we'd want to do is go check in security for that. You may or may not have access to security, but I can pop out here, check at a user level, user security. Just pick a user. Let's see if I've got any out here in my sample world. Let's try trainee one. Doesn't have access to this company, but I would need to see if they're using which alternate modified forms, and then I would click back into here to see if you are checking this window. I will say select, no, not that, select your series. Work opposite up this window because it will load faster if you do. If you just leave it at all products and reports, it's going to load all the reports and it takes a lot longer. So I can come out here and see, does this, so this is using the native GP report and this is using the native GP report, which means anybody who is a default user is not using those two modified reports and is using the current forms, okay? All right, that is pretty much what I have because 1099s are very straightforward. There are no real changes this year. I do believe I saw at the end of January, there's going to be a change to the 1099 form number, I think. I'm sure they will file properly if you have the old OMB number on it. And there's also going to be a change to something in the 1096, I think. So there's a couple of things coming out towards the end of January. I don't think either of them are showstoppers. I'm sure you can file without putting that update in, but you might, if you are concerned, email me and I'll show you what the changes are going to be and you can decide. And with that, I took 20 whole minutes, so I talked very fast, but I think I covered everything. Does anybody have any questions or want to see any of this in more detail? No? All right, well, then thank you for joining us. Watch for next month's webinar. I'm not sure what the topic's going to be yet, but we do have some payroll ones on the horizon that I know of, as well as some other interesting sales order, purchase order ones. So please join us for the next webinar. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or email support. Thank you very much.